right, let's get into it. All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming to the Commons today to take your lunch break with us. Really appreciate it. Welcome to Leadership Spotlight Series. Today we're talking on the innovators in digital currency and blockchain. So the Leadership Spotlight Series is a monthly free series where we just candidly feature and hone in on innovators and leaders in our community that are building awesome things. We'd love to touch on innovation. So this is a monthly series. It's absolutely free. Let's give a shout out to Mad Greens for providing the free lunch to us, keeping it healthy and fresh. Thank you, Mad Greens. Laura, you rock. So a little bit about the Commons on Champa before we dive into it. The Commons on Champa was opened 2.5 years ago. It's a really unique public-private partnership where the city and county really dove in and led the way in giving us this old 1940s police station building. The Downtown Denver Partnership is the leader of this initiative. We raised the money, $2.5 million, to renovate this space and really bring in awesome resources that will help all different types of entrepreneurs. So resources like access to physical space, a co-working space at the end of the hall, totally for free, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, free fast Wi-Fi, coffee, everything you need. And then also a mentorship program. Denver's Office of Economic Development has a team of advisors that are here throughout the week, helping any type of entrepreneur go through any questions that they have around their business. And then a lot of programs and community events, a lot of connective events. So a lot going on. Also a space up on the second floor. As companies start to grow, they can have a designated desk up on the second floor with all the mail services and everything you need. So a little bit about the Commons right there. I'd like to now introduce our moderator, Kevin Owocki. Kevin Owocki is the organizer of the Boulder Blockchain Meetup, an organizer of Boulder Startup Week, and is co-host of the Startup CTO IO podcast. He's been in the blockchain space since 2010 as an investor, speaker, software engineer, and miner. So let's give it up and welcome Kevin.
Thanks, Jesse. First off, I want to start the panel off by thanking the Commons on Champa for having us. It's super important value both in Boulder and Denver to our startup communities to have community spaces where we can have conversations like this. My personal background with respect to blockchain is getting into it in 2010 as an investor, and it kind of seemed like a toy to me back then. In retrospect, I think that I should have taken it more seriously, and I think that probably everyone in this room feels like they should have taken it more seriously back then. But since then, I've been a miner, I've been a developer, and recently I am the organizer of the Boulder Blockchain Meetup. So I see a few friendly faces from the Boulder Blockchain Meetup in the audience, and it's good to see you guys coming out to Denver to support the Denver community. Quick show of hands, who would consider themselves sort of like a beginner when it comes to blockchain stuff? Got it. And who would consider themselves sort of in the space or a little bit more on the advanced side? Okay, a few hands. And then show of hands, how many people would consider themselves to be an investor in the space? Got it. How many people are actually actively writing software in the space? Okay, 1 or 2 hands. Yeah, and then has anyone experimented with mining, either cloud mining or physical mining? Okay, cool. Yeah. All right, so this is a good breakdown of the audience, I think. So I suppose I'll tee off the panel by introducing John, the COO of Shapeshift, and Sean Owen, the CEO of Salt Lending. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage. Let's see, Jesse gave a full intro to me, so I should probably do you guys the same honor. You guys want to give introductions for yourself?
Sure. My name is John. I'm the COO of Shapeshift.io. Shapeshift is a digital asset exchange, meaning we allow users to quickly and easily trade between different types of digital assets. We've been in operation for about three years now, and we've grown a tremendous amount in that time. Our CEO is Eric Voorhees, who's a well-known kind of luminary and thought leader in the space. I personally have been doing web and application and development and design for about 15 years. And I got into blockchain and Bitcoin and the entire crypto space in probably about 2011, 2012. Just became very fascinated with it. I was definitely one of those people who, when I first heard about Bitcoin, I kind of wrote it off. I was like, oh, that's stupid. That's not going to work. But then I kind of started paying more attention to it. I spent more time researching it and fell down what we call in the crypto space the rabbit hole, and it kind of just took over my life over that time.
Hey everybody, Sean Owen, CEO of Salt Lending. We're a scrappy little startup here, just getting started. And our product is to allow people that have assets that are recorded on a blockchain or digital ledger, distributed ledger, to leverage those as property. So currently this market does not exist. We're opening up a credit market. For simple terms, if you understand Bitcoin, we would allow you to post that as collateral in the same way you would a home or a piece of property, and we would borrow against that to a certain portion in cash. A little bit about myself, I got involved with Bitcoin, heard about it first in 2010, kind of was like, wow, that sounds really interesting. I was mostly interested from the perspective of it being sold as this finite supply of digital money that emulated gold. I found that very fascinating, being someone who's interested in gold and silver. And then the implications of it, as soon as I kind of started figuring out where that could go with the blockchain, just kind of blew my mind. So I've been involved also in hosting meetups and facilitating meeting anybody I could in the space for several years now, since 2012. And I've kind of just been obsessed ever since.
So I'm curious, since we've all been in the industry for about half a decade now, how would you describe the industry? What are the biggest opportunities and threats in the year 2017? And why don't we start with you, Sean?
Biggest opportunity and threat?
Biggest opportunity and threat.
The opportunities, in my opinion, still seem pretty boundless and endless. There's just so many different applications with accounting for a distributed ledger for blockchain. So it's hard sometimes. When I first was getting involved with Salt, there were, I don't know, probably 15 good ideas that we scrapped that all probably could be very good ventures that just weren't quite as big and compelling as Salt. But the opportunities are just vast and huge, and if you're interested, there's lots of ways to get involved. The biggest risks, I don't really see a lot of risks to the technology. I think it's kind of a foregone conclusion in my mind that this will underpin a big layer of the internet. How that works, what protocols when, doesn't really matter. The fact is that the technology is there, so I don't see a lot of risks there.
Yeah, so on the opportunities side, I totally agree with Sean. It's almost mind-boggling how many opportunities there are in the space. We're very much at, I still think, the tip of the iceberg level of the opportunities that can be explored in the crypto and blockchain space. We have this problem at Shapeshift a lot in just trying to control what we are actually going to work on, because we see so much what we call low-hanging fruit. So crypto is an entirely new industry, and it's redoing a lot of what has been done in either financial, but also any sector that involves value or any sort of middleman. And as a result, there's all this low-hanging fruit just kind of standing around waiting to be picked. There's an endless amounts of good ideas that people can hop on, and opportunities to create either new decentralized forms of value or new businesses all over the place. So the opportunities are almost boundless right now. I think what Salt's doing is actually a very great opportunity that was just waiting there to be picked, that I'm very glad the Salt team is doing. On the threat side, it is still all kind of an experiment. So I think it's the genie's kind of out of the bottle when it comes to blockchain technology. It's not going back in, it's not going away. But which particular technology and which particular application of blockchain actually wins out is still very much in question. And a lot of these things that people are throwing lots of money at could very well fail at one point. So there is certainly a threat that a lot of new people who come into the space, and we've seen this in waves in the Bitcoin industry in the last number of years, may end up losing a bunch of money if they come in at the wrong time and they're not ready to hold for the long term, because it can be very volatile. So I think that is a threat in that the experiments may or may not work. Some of them will likely work, but not all of them will.
All right, great answers. You guys spoke a little bit about how there's such opportunity in the space, and I'm curious what you think the crypto space looks like when we talk let's say the year 2025, are we going to see an unbundling of banks, of insurance companies, of other financial products? Would you describe 2025 as Web3? And I'm sort of leading the question now, but I guess the question is, how would you, what do you think that we're going to see in the crypto landscape by 2025?
Yeah, so great question. I think the honest truth is that no one has any real clue. That's so far out. Things in the blockchain space move so fast that trying to predict even 2 or 3 years out is very difficult. 5 or 10 years, very, very difficult. And this is actually one of the really important facets to understand, especially when it comes to things like regulators and other people who are trying to come in and kind of moderate or regulate the space. Is very much like the early days of the internet. Back in the early days of the internet, when it was essentially just a bunch of computer nerds interacting on message boards, it was very hard to see how that was going to transform into a technology that would impact all of our lives. And blockchain is in a very similar space right now, where even those of us in the industry who do this every day as our living, we don't know what this is going to evolve into. And anyone who tells you they absolutely know what it's going to evolve into, I would be very suspect of, because there's so much innovation happening in so many different directions that we just don't really know. If I was going to take some guesses, I would say that the financial backbones of our system, our current financial system, are going to be either replaced or revolutionized in very significant ways. It's already starting to happen. And I do think that we will live in a future where money is not necessarily, and value is just thought of very differently. As someone who's been in the crypto space this long, the way I think about money and the way I think about Bitcoin is it's much harder money to me than dollars or any sort of government currency. I don't even really think about that as real money anymore. Real money to me is crypto, and I think as more people kind of come around to that kind of concept of value and what a blockchain can accomplish, that will start changing societal perceptions of just how we even view these things.
Yeah, I would add to that. I'm not very good at making predictions either. But I think a lot back when I was young and the internet was still kind of burgeoning and new, and it seemed like it did all these really amazing things, even though it took like a long time for the page to load. Me and my friends would sit around and we'd daydream about video games that were 3D. It's going to be so cool. And then I don't think any of us had any idea. We could dream wild dreams, and a lot of us were right. Yeah, there are video games that are 3D, web pages load fast, but it was really hard to imagine that everybody so quickly would have supercomputers in their pockets and everybody would be so connected and everything would be so digital, so fast. And so being at the verge of this, which I kind of think of as another layer on top of the internet, the internet of value transfer, it's right now we have a front row seat because we're looking at it all day long, and it's changing so fast. It's changing so much faster than the internet before. But you can still kind of just dream up these crazy ideas. And I'd be willing to bet that we missed those by a mark. I think we're going to see much more profound change happen than we could predict. If I were to make a few predictions, I would say, along with John, the way that value is transferred will radically change, especially how fast it can be transferred and who owns what will change fundamentally. And I'm very optimistic that it'll be a positive change.
Great. I am curious, as someone who's been doing smart contract development myself, especially coming from a web background, there's obviously a whole other set of requirements associated with doing smart contract development, given the amount of money involved and the trustless nature of it. I was wondering if you guys could speak a little bit about what it's like to do smart contract development and how that's been for you guys.
Sure. So at Shapeshift, we have pretty good experience with this. Not too many people in the world have very good experience with smart contract development at this point, but we recently released a product called Prism that is built on the Ethereum blockchain that allows someone to create a portfolio of digital assets backed by Ethereum, all done with Ethereum smart contracts. It's a very cool idea. We're really excited about it. A lot of other people seem excited about it. Right now it's in closed beta. And one of the things we learned during this development is that very basic level smart contract development is not necessarily that hard, but doing it well and doing it securely is very hard. So there's a couple, I think, facets that are really important to highlight. So one, obviously, is the security. Because when you deploy a smart contract, you're generally deploying something that's immutable, that's going to live on chain forever, and you no longer have control over, you have to be really, really, really certain that what you put up there cannot be exploited or used, you know, in some sort of ill-gotten way that you didn't expect. And we've already seen examples of that in the industry, the most famous of that being this organization called the DAO, the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, that raised $150 million in Ethereum, you know, a little over a year ago. And no more than 3 or 4 weeks after it did that, a bug was exploited in the smart contract that just totally collapsed it. You know, a hacker was able to steal a bunch of money out of there. It actually caused a kind of existential crisis in Ethereum that caused a split into Ethereum and what's now called Ethereum Classic. So it's very, very difficult to do these things securely, and anyone who's doing smart contract development should take it very, very slowly. You know, build what you have, but don't just put it out there and let people use it right away. You know, really test it well and let people in slowly. That's what we're doing with Prism, is we're taking our time in terms of how much we let people in and how much we let them do and how much value we let them put into these contracts. The second thing I think that's really important to note with smart contract development is that you have to be very, very concise and efficient. There's only so much code that you can even put on chain, and every bit of code that you add to chain makes it more expensive to deploy that contract and potentially more expensive for someone to use that contract. And as the price of some of these assets has skyrocketed, like Ethereum, you know, when we first built Prism, it cost like, you know, $1, you know, $1 or $2 to deploy a Prism contract on the chain without doing any changes ourselves, just because of the rise of the asset. It's now cost like $15 or $20, and that's requiring us to optimize things again, because the expense of using a smart contract goes up as the asset that's powering it goes up. So you have to be as efficient as possible and really try to do whatever code or logic you create in as small a space as possible to get the best efficiency gains.
Yeah, we're still really, really, really early with this concept of smart contracts. Prism, I would say, arguably is probably one of the first real smart contracts that's being used. Salt is also working in a lot of capacity to build around smart contracts, and every one of these protocol layers has a different way that can unfold. So there's a lot to be learned in the future. Maybe there's a lot that can be templated, maybe people come up with different ways to make it work. But right now we don't know kind of what direction that goes. What I do know is that the idea is extremely fascinating. The idea that you can take some type of social or physical contract that we understand through language and then convert that into a digital form that can self-execute is very fascinating and has profound implications. But I do think it's going to take a lot of time. And on that note, I'd even say for anybody that's entrepreneurial here, or anybody that's interested in development, there's a lot of job opportunities in that space, a tremendous amount, and the pay is very, very good. They're in high demand, so we're constantly looking for anybody that may be able to join the team in any capacity. And it's really, really fascinating stuff. But I agree with John. I think we're very early on. I think if you're going to play around with that, sounds like you are to a degree, you really got to take it slow. Don't try to put a bunch of money into something yet. Just learn how it works and take it one piece at a time. Because a very simple idea can turn out to be very complex if it's going to be permanent. And then that's going to have to execute every single time. And then there's the whole value proposition that you brought up too, which is very interesting. So fascinating concept. If you haven't checked it out, I'd recommend it. But it's still really, really early days there.
Totally. Yeah. To add one thing, I think one of the most prophetic things I saw in the last year was after the DAO raised all of its money, there was a Wall Street Journal article that came out, or maybe it was New York Times, I can't remember, with Christopher Jensch, one of the lead developers of the DAO. And this was right after they raised all this money, and they were interviewing them because it was so interesting, you know, that they raised this robot basically that lives online raised all this money, and they were asking him if he would do anything differently, and he said to them, "Well, if I knew how much money would have been put into this, I would have wanted a lot more testing." And that was about 2 or 3 weeks before the DAO got hacked and everything collapsed. So really, really take that to heart. These ideas can, I mean, the other thing about this space is that the ideas can grow a lot faster than you expect. So Shapeshift itself was a very good example of that. We did not expect Shapeshift to grow nearly as fast as it did. And a lot of these projects in this space, because people get excited about these ideas, grow far faster than maybe they should sometimes. So really, really be ready before you deploy something and start taking other people's money, because bad things can happen.
Okay. What are some notable trends in crypto in the year 2017 that have have got you excited about the space? And Sean, let's start with you.
Okay, so my favorite trend right now, and some people hate this, but my favorite trend is the tokenization of everything. I know that a lot of these ideas are not going to work out. It's a lot of hype cycles, a lot of craze right now. There's a lot of criticism for very good reasons. There's lots of just experimentation happening. But if you look at just any way you look at it, creative destruction, or just people experimenting is how so many great things have been invented and how so many great things have come to fruition. And so I love seeing this concept of everybody being able to just do something they never could before. People that can jump into a new idea, get funded quickly, see where it goes, and really experiment and see how interesting things can be. It's been fascinating for me to see my passion back when it was just one blockchain evolve into just thousands of blockchains that now have thousands of layers on top of that. And the trend this year has been really kind of a little bit of a tipping point. I still think we're very early, but I'm extremely bullish on the ability to tokenize everything, for the ability for any idea to get funded quickly, for the ability to rethink the way that companies get funded in general. These are all really interesting things, and although a lot of it is going to shake out in ways that we don't know, I'm sure it'll be a lot like the dot-com boom or any other boom where a lot of people have good ideas that turned out to be really bad ideas. I think it's a great thing for the economy. I think it's a great thing for excitement, people's passions to be able to come to life, and I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, like Sean, I'm very excited about just the amount of things that are starting to be tokenized and the general tokenization of value. At Shapeshift, we've kind of had a philosophy ever since we started that we think the majority of value in the world will be digitized and tokenized eventually. When we first started pitching investors on that idea 3 years ago, most of them kind of looked at us funny. They didn't really understand what we were saying. Even other people in the crypto space, our kind of thesis was very weird, because at that point, a lot of people thought Bitcoin or maybe one or two would be the only digital assets, and there wouldn't be very many. But I think we kind of recognized very early on that no, there's going to be many of these things. There's going to be, we don't necessarily know how many blockchains there will be, but there will be many, many, many types of value, many, many, many types of tokenization. And the last year or so has really kind of proved that out. We've seen it just in terms of our own growth, but we've also seen it in terms of the space. A lot of other companies that never thought we would touch more than Bitcoin or really get all that interested in tokens have become very interested and have kind of dived full forward into this. And I think it's because everyone's starting to realize that this stuff is inevitable, that there's no reason for value to exist on paper in some back office. There's no reason that stocks need to take 3 or 4 days to settle a trade, or all these various things that a blockchain can make far more efficient and far more, kind of democratize it. So as I think things like ICOs and some of these sales start happening and the general tokenization, I think that's super exciting, and it's probably the thing I am also most excited about. The second thing would have been what we just talked about. Smart contract development, I think, is the other kind of trend that's starting to actually occur. Smart contracts were really nothing more than an idea 2 years ago. Only in the last year have you seen real examples of smart contracts in the wild that do anything. I do think Prism is probably one of the first kind of consumer-ready smart contracts that can actually be applied, but there's a lot of very cool ideas going on in smart contract development that people are experimenting with. And many of those may be 6, 12 months, or even multiple years away from being ready for consumer interaction. But I do think that is just going to increase, and that both tokenization and smart contracts are not going anywhere.
Great. In my work as the organizer of Boulder Blockchain, I just think it's so interesting, the cross-section of humanity that I see coming out to the meetups and more generally in the space. I mean, I would sort of describe it as Burning Man meets Wall Street. And because it's an intersection of people of all kinds. And I'm curious, for you guys being in the space and starting successful ventures in this space, what are the values within your teams and your company that you look to unite people, not only within your team, but to build a successful team in this emerging market?
Yeah, so there's a number of things we look for whenever we're hiring someone or whenever we're bringing someone on the team, but I mean, first and foremost is just a willingness and a want to learn this type of stuff. There's a ton to learn in this space. The majority of people, the majority of the population doesn't know either very little or nothing about it. So there's a large getting up to speed period, but generally the willingness to learn and the understanding of how this is going to change things and that excitement towards it is definitely something that we look for, other than obvious things like technical ability when we're hiring developers or, their own individual skill set for the position we're hiring. It's really important that people want to be there. I say this about Shapeshift a lot. It's amazing how many people come into our office that just really want to be there, that they don't feel like they're just dragging themselves into a job. They would be there regardless sometimes of how much they're being paid or what their roles are. They just really want to be involved. So you won't survive in this space very long if you're not enthusiastic about it, if you don't want to be involved. So the want to learn, the want to understand more, the want to basically contribute to something that's going to help change various parts of the world as we know it is very important.
Yeah, I could not agree with John more on that. I am a hard worker. I've always really enjoyed work. That's kind of my play. And I get up early in the morning and I go to bed really late at night. And at both points in those times, I am thinking about this stuff and I'm really excited about it. So when I'm looking for the team, I'm looking for other people who are really just passionate. That's an indicator to me that those people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. I can look myself in the mirror and say, this is perfect for me. And so the closer you can see other people around you that are just passionate about turning the four-letter word into play and that just love what they're doing, that's a huge piece of the team culture, I think. But then furthermore to that, you really have to have some type of understanding or at least desire to learn and be involved with something that's so cutting edge and so niche, and a lot of people will critique it, and there's a lot of people that will throw kind of crazy questions at it and be like, what? Never even heard of that before, right? So you end up in this really interesting environment where you know something that a lot of other people don't, and that can be a lot of fun for people, that can be a lot of very terrifying for other people, right? So it's your comfort level of being in that disruptive environment, in that kind of niche environment, which maybe a year from now you have no idea if it's going to work or not. But those are the things I look for in all around. In general, you have to take security very serious. You have to understand technology very deeply. You can't just come at this and be like, oh, I don't really like computers. This is all predicated off of technology. So there's just a lot of elements that if you find the interest in it, you'll know, and if you don't, just stay away.
I have one final question, then we'll break for audience questions. So if you're out there in the audience and you have a question for the panelists, now is the time to start thinking about asking it. If I am outside of the space or I'm just starting to get into this space, what are the best ways to get involved with the cryptocurrency community right now?
Buy some Bitcoin or Ethereum. Just get a wallet, play around with it, lose some money, take 20 bucks and burn it, send it to your friends, break something. It's really not that complicated. If you just try to break something, you'll learn really quick. Oh, that wasn't that hard. There's only 3 buttons. I figured it out. But it's amazing to me over the years how many people I have told early on, hey, you should buy some Bitcoin when it was like 20 bucks, 100 bucks, 120 bucks, 200 bucks, 250 bucks, this has been a never-ending theme for me. And I'm still going to say to everybody now, just buy some, try to break something, burn a little cash. You're probably going to blow that on an espresso or a beer later anyway. Right? And it will be worth it. You'll either find out, yeah, I get it, this is really cool, or I don't have any interest in this whatsoever. It'll be that fast. So that's how I get started. And then there's great information to learn. There's been tons of books, there's been tons of documentaries. There's just I can't even keep up with it. There's so much information. I've been trying my hardest for 7 years now to understand everything. And there's just too much. It's evolving too fast for anybody to keep up with it. So pick your niche, figure out what you're interested in, and just follow that passion.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean's advice is probably the best. Just buy a little bit of Bitcoin, 10, 20 bucks worth, and get a little bit of Ethereum, some of these digital assets, because it'll teach you so much about how they work, just having to do it. I've lost count of the number of people over the years that I've given a little bit of Bitcoin, 10, 20 bucks of Bitcoin to, who didn't take it seriously, they lost their private key, they replaced their phone and didn't think about the fact they had Bitcoin on their phone, and all those people basically lost, equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point because of how much crypto grew. And if they had just kept their keys, they wouldn't be in that position. But just interacting with it a little bit is very important. It's the actual practical application of it is by far the most important to get people to understand it. I've spent hours talking to people to not really make a dent in their thinking, and then I've switched. Generally, at this point, I cut myself off pretty quickly to say, hey, let's get your smartphone out, let's download a wallet, I'm going to give you $10 of Bitcoin. And that goes far farther in understanding and getting people to understand it than any amount of research. That being said, finding a part of this industry that is interesting to you. One of the cool things about the blockchain space is that there's something going on in almost every industry. So, I've talked to some of my friends who are musicians, and there's a lot of interesting things that are going on in terms of trying to revolutionize distribution methods for artists and the way that content is distributed to people and how those artists get paid for it is really interesting going on in the tokenization world. And pretty much any industry you can think of, there's either something already happening in the blockchain space from, or if there isn't, then there probably should be. So finding that thing that's actually really passionate to you, you don't have to be a finance nerd, you don't have to even be interested in money. Finding the thing that's actually really interesting to you and how it applies to blockchain is a really good way to find passion and start your kind of research train of what you want to look into in the space.
Great, and I would also add that there's meetups in both Denver and Boulder around this stuff. There's Ethereum Denver, there's Rocky Mountain Blockchain, there's Boulder Blockchain, and there is the Ethereum Boulder meetup.
Yeah.
All right, questions from the audience?
I'm going to awkwardly run around with the mic so people can hear.
Great.
Regarding like the tokenization of everything that you had just brought up, there are kind of two ways that I see it going, but I haven't thought of it all the way. And one of the ways seems like we need to either bridge the gap between the assets that we have today and the assets that will be ultimately digitized, or the assets of today have to kind of die out and be replaced almost with different representations. How do you see that going either way, or do you have like a third vision of like how it's going to happen?
Yeah, great question. I honestly think both of those things will probably happen. You're going to have you're going to have kind of bridge things. Like even Salt, the product they're building is kind of a bridge from the old, the new world to the old, letting you get a fiat loan with your crypto assets. Those kind of tools are going to be very, very important because most people are not going to understand the stuff, and they're not. Most people's thought of money is too tied to either the dollar or some national currency for them to just switch over full bore immediately. But I do also think that a lot of these things will start to just be outright replaced. As new forms of value come about that are better than the old forms of value, people will naturally tend towards those as applications get built on top of them. I think this kind of goes back to the question about where will we be in 2020, 2025. But I think a lot of these things will end up being kind of backbone layers, kind of like TCP or HTTP is for the internet, where most users 5 or 10 years from now may not even understand that they're using these things, but they will power everything in the background. And as that starts to happen, they might see their dollar balance on a particular website that they're using, when in reality that is just using tokenized value. And even fiat currencies will likely become tokenized and built into blockchains sooner rather than later. There's already a couple countries in the world that are experimenting with this, and the ones that don't will eventually just get left behind. So I think competition will force that.
Yeah, so at a fundamental level, if you think about kind of what we're talking about, the distributed ledger and blockchain, you're talking first and foremost about accounting. So there's a set of numbers, and it's a way of accounting for things. So when you're talking about how do we think about money or stock or value, all of it is related directly to accounting for something. And so to answer your question, I think it's both, but really anything that you would assign numbers to, whether it's just making tallies in your own notebook, whether it's in your QuickBooks, whether it's in a text message, whether it's in your stock portfolio, whether it's in your Bitcoin wallet, whether it's in your bank account, those are all different ways of accounting. And so I think the mechanism, the technology of how to account in a digital environment is all that's really changing. So instead of having the technology we have today, which for example is very different in banking than it is for the SEC for securities, just very different than it is in QuickBooks, which is different than how other accounting softwares work. There's just a lot of fragmented accounting happening right now from every single business, bill landing, accounts payable, payroll, inventory, you name it, all of which is accounting. But if you have a distributed ledger that can do accounting that can be counterfeit, and you can say this one thing existed from its inception to wherever it went, then you have a different paradigm to work with. It's just a new mechanism. So I believe with John also that in our lifetime we will see everything transform with how we do accounting, and there will be much closer, if not permanent, discrepancy removal from accounting problems. So different ledgers trying to talk to each other and a bunch of people sitting around doing accounting. I think all of that's going to be completely changed. Does that answer it?
Question here, and then we'll go to the back.
I think I'm going to piggyback on that. I think it's a really good question. I kind of have a two-part question that I think also builds on that, which is, one, how do you see this benefiting end users specifically? Like in my daily life, how will this impact me? And then secondarily to that, when banks tokenize their finances, they're no longer, like if you store $2,000 in your savings account, they're no longer able to use that. Or if they do, it's not there. So it's suddenly contained within that blockchain. How do you see those types of free services that essentially we're able to receive from banks being replaced or paid for if value is no longer more of a cerebral in the air thing? It's actually tethered to the blockchain itself. And then I guess beyond that, doesn't that create a deflationary currency in which you're discouraged from trading it because by not, it adds value?
I think there's like 4 questions there.
It's all piggybacking.
Okay, which one do you want the most? I think.
Okay, so let me see if I can answer that. To just do a thought experiment, and again, this is completely just a thought experiment. I'm not an economist. I don't want to throw anything out there that anybody should hold me to. But if you want to get your mind wrapped around what that would look like, imagine for a second that it just made economic sense to issue a national currency, a currency that everybody uses, and the only thing that was going to change is the number that everybody was using was, instead of it being printed on paper or swapped based off bonds and then issued to large banks who lend it out, trickle down to the end user, and lots of custodians all over the place that hold that. So you could think about thousands of different ledgers that are accounting for $1. Imagine if you just had all of the dollars on the blockchain. Now, whether it's inflationary or deflationary, that's subjective because you can make those rules up. So we'll say that it's inflationary. We're just mimicking exactly the way the dollar works. Now, the main change there is that there's no need anymore to print any more than you need, right? So they're not going to get lost. They're not going to disappear as much. You're going to know how many exist at any point in time that are moving or circulating, and everybody's going to hold them at some point in time in a wallet or in a structure where there's multiple people that have access to signing rights. So it just fundamentally changes the infrastructure more than anything, and it kind of flattens it. So the amount of infrastructure needed to run that currently, if we're going to move to Mars and we're going to set up a central bank and we're going to issue currency and we're going to need all kinds of different distributed banks and everybody needed a bank account, everybody needed a different set of books to account for that, that would be very expensive. If you could do that in a network on the internet where there was a set amount and it was a matter of distributing and everybody holds the rights to that and everybody can send to and from each other, then it just completely wipes that out and takes it down to a fraction of the cost. Then the costs are more focused on what does it cost us to run this network? And you can almost think of the banking structure as a network. That's really what it is. It's a network of banks. So it's just fundamentally different how you have to wrap your mind around that. And again, that's a thought experiment, just to understand kind of the implications of what would happen if you were going to change the way that you do accounting.
Yeah, so to kind of add on that idea, I think in the United States, in general, we're very, very spoiled. We've had a national currency that generally has only inflated so much. We've had a government that for the most part has been relatively stable, maybe not so much anymore, but generally has been historically. And as a result, we've all kind of grown used to the fact that like $1 is $1, and generally your dollar is not worth a heck of a lot less tomorrow than it is today, even if over time it is going down in value. But the rest of the world is not really like that. There are large sectors of the world, probably the majority of the world, that don't even have access to bank accounts. And a lot of those people in those various countries, they've had national currencies that have had dealing with hyperinflation, places like Venezuela, other South American countries, other parts of the world, places where they can't trust that their money is going to be money tomorrow, that it's going to be worth anything of value tomorrow. And those people tend to understand, like when we travel for conferences and stuff, and we talk to people in these countries, they understand the value proposition of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies far faster than I think actually people in this country do, because they've seen the problems. They've seen the problems that come with government-controlled money and all of the issues and not being able to have bank accounts. So I think the biggest benefit to end users, especially the unbanked population, is that you don't need a bank. There may still be banking services. I don't think banks are going to be totally eliminated. But I do think that the fact that someone in, sub-Saharan Africa or various other places in the world that do not currently have bank accounts, all they really need is a smartphone, and they can securely store value on their phone that they're, essentially can't just be inflated against or can't just be taken from them. There's places like Cyprus or even Greece where the government comes in and just takes money out of people's bank accounts, says we need this back, we need to bail out our government, and not having that sort of control over your money creates all sorts of problems and all sorts of uncertainty in markets and currency in general that I think can be eliminated.
Yeah, but I would also add, the question that I give to my friends and family when they ask, how's this going to affect me as a user, as an end user of financial services, is to put it back on them and to say, if you had asked me in 1995 how the record industry was going to change because of the internet, I wouldn't have even been able to describe it to you, because I would have said, you'll be able to have 10,000 CDs in your pocket. You would have looked at me like I had 3 heads. And what we're talking about is, I think the magnitude of change is, I think, as large as record companies disappearing and digitization of MP3s, but for the financial services industry and the insurance industry, likely you'll have a bank in your pocket. Jesse, you want to get the next question?
I'm right here. To the gentleman that just asked those questions, I highly recommend you have 2 books to check out. The End of Money, which is about Bitcoin cryptocurrency impact to the end user, and then The Death of Money is about the IMF and the World Bank, and how, to his point, numerous countries are gunning for the dollar to be removed from the world currency, reserve currency, and so it'll show you how that will impact cryptocurrency if that in fact happens. It's pretty fascinating. My question is more of a function question. Can you tell me how to earn gas and how gas is used in a transaction?
So gas is a concept mostly popularized by the Ethereum blockchain. And so the difference between something like Ethereum and Bitcoin is Bitcoin was made basically solely to be a digital ledger to move value from place A to place B, and to be very secure and transparent when doing that. Ethereum tried to basically take a broader view of what a blockchain can do. It tried to create what's called they call it a decentralized world computer, meaning anyone can pay the Ethereum virtual machine, the blockchain, to basically act on smart contract code to essentially pay it for computing power. So the concept was introduced in Ethereum of this concept of gas. And the idea is that anytime you ask the Ethereum virtual machine to do some sort of computation, to do some sort of programmatic application, that you have to pay some sort of some sort of fee or some sort of thing to do that. And that's where the concept of gas came. It's kind of like, gas is the tiny bit of value that powers the Ethereum blockchain, almost like gas powers your car. So it actually burns it. It actually, you lose that value, but you pay it to the network for the service that the network is providing to you of all this decentralized computing power. The original reason that you have gas is as an anti-spam prevention. You say, well, why can't this all just be free? Why should we even charge for this? But the problem is there's only limited resources on this Ethereum virtual machine. And if everyone can use it for free with no problem, that would allow all sorts of attacks and spam against the network that would make it unusable for anyone. So it's really important to kind of achieve this ratio of affordable gas costs to run a smart contract or something on Ethereum, but not make it so cheap that you allow attacks. So finding that equilibrium is something I don't think the Ethereum network's really even accomplished yet. That's constantly evolving. But it is a very important concept because without gas, these things really wouldn't work. The entire concept lets the game theory aspects and the economy that it's trying to build work.
So this is just kind of adding to that. Another thing that I think is very fascinating is Bitcoin originally and then followed by Ethereum, both were very successful because of incentive structures. And without that incentive structure, you don't want to participate in the network. So Bitcoin did it through what was called mining, which is a clever way of paying people to secure the network and verify transactions. Ethereum did take it a step further quite a bit. But what I find very interesting is this notion that you can experiment now with economics and value transfer and whatever else game theory you want to in a way, which is if we create a network of people, say everybody in this room, we have an idea, we want to do the basic income, or we want a universal basic income, or we want to do an inflationary currency, or we want to do whatever. You can test these theories that have never been tested before because we effectively can tweak all these parameters and say what really motivates people the most. Is it referral codes? Is it paying people in fees? How do you distribute the network capacity? How do you pay for this resource to exist without having a central authority? And thus the network is self-propelling itself. And I find that very fascinating. So I think we're at the very beginning of that. Bitcoin kind of proved that an entity that doesn't have an entity, a protocol, can motivate people to fund it. And Ethereum and many of these other ones have taken that much further. So I'm very excited to see kind of what wild ideas have never been tested before now that can be run and kind of see how big can that network grow. What kind of problems do we run in with these different ways of thinking about the economy, different ways of thinking about income and value altogether.
So can it be earned when your node is effectively being used to mine? Or
Gas specifically?
yes.
I'm sorry, what was the question? Can it be earned?
Do you earn gas if your node is being utilized?
Yes, so on the Ethereum network, so basically on the Bitcoin network, the Bitcoin miners get the block reward if they find a block, plus whatever mining fees are available in that block. And similarly in Ethereum, the gas cost goes to the miners. So it's essentially paid to the miners, and it's an additional incentive to the miners to keep running the network.
Thank you.
Question right here.
Cool. I feel like I need a minute for the answer. It was pretty interesting, but so I've only been paying attention to crypto for about 6 months, and I'm interested in kind of more tactically how you run a business post ICO. So people look at Bitcoin and Litecoin and Tezos as these stores of value, and in theory those values can go to the moon, right? I participated in the Salt ICO, and what I thought was interesting was the way that you peg the token to paying for the service. So there's 1 salt per year, and that seems to put some upper and lower bounds on the value of that token once it hits the markets. And what I was wondering is, does that fundamentally change how you operate your business or forecast, or is there something in my question that I'm totally missing? And I'm just interested in that if you have to think about forecasting and running your business differently because you're charging a token whose value can change over time, right?
Yeah, so very good question. The first thing, there's 2 things to kind of outlay before I can answer that specifically. One is that you can tokenize a lot of anything. So you can tokenize a piece of your business, you can tokenize a product, you can tokenize equity, you can tokenize debt, you can tokenize contracts, you can kind of pick whatever you want that you need to represent, and then you can start working around how would this function, what kind of functionality does this have, what kind of use case does this have. So with Salt, it's a membership base, which if anybody's familiar in the financial services, it's very akin to a Bloomberg terminal, where you have this computer that you pay for access. Once you have the access, you can round up and get either very basic access, or you can get full carte blanche. In the physical world, I like to make the analogy of like a country club. Maybe you sign up for the base country club annual subscription, but then if you want the all-in, you can go eat, drink, whatever all the time. It's going to cost you much more. It's going to be platinum. So that's just one element, that's one product that we thought was very interesting to tokenize. We have bigger plans to do many other ones. The easiest ones to think about are like equities, because those are well-known, proven instruments that have been around forever. Currencies, we all kind of just fundamentally know what that means. But in regards to a business, you do have to think about a lot of different elements. The second piece that I would like to outline is that we're not subjective to the secondary market. In fact, we don't ever even talk about it. One of the cool features is that these are transferable. So you have this whole new global system of accounting that can have anybody access it anywhere, anytime, as long as they've got some bandwidth and a device. And that fundamentally changes the entire paradigm on so many levels. But from a business standpoint, we still have levers that we have to pull, mostly directed to the P&L. You have costs like marketing, you can write things out to marketing, discounts, you can do all the normal things that just make sense from having income come in and then paying expense and being left with some retained earnings. So it doesn't really put you in any type of new position in regards to running the business. You still have to operate everything just like it was a business. Now that's for one specific application that we did. It'd be very different if you were talking about something like a different type of product. So there's a million different ways you can imagine tokenizing invoices, maybe tokenizing just supply chains, right? Every one of those would be different. So for our application, no, it doesn't really expose us to the secondary market at all because we have an internal marketplace and we have a current profit and loss system in place for that.
Question here. Hey, thank you for doing this. I'm another time.
Good to see you again.
Thank you. The question is, on these ICOs with tokenization plays, there's very few information rights for the users. On fiat, we have the CFPB, we have SEC, FinCEN, FINRA, whatever it is. Isn't this an opportunity to be more user-focused and have bodies that do information rights and clawback rights and all the other good stuff that we are so used to?
Yeah, I think this kind of goes back to the question you asked earlier, which is how do these two bridge together? And I think it's both. So we have a lot of infrastructure that already exists that should not go away. It should just be reformed and maybe become more efficient, right? And so whether that's governance, whether that's voting, whether that's economics, whether that's business, there's all these institutions and models in our world that exist for a reason, right? They're here because we needed them. Those were the institutions that got us to where we are now today. So I don't really see it so much as maybe tearing something down and just starting from scratch, rather than a new layer on top of which we have all the old institutions already that exist, and how should we interact with these with the new technology. And for a simple example, if you were to take how a lot of companies fund themselves early on, it's usually through a piece of paper. It's a promissory note. You guys, your friends and your family say, hey, I got this great idea, help me out, can you write me a check? Here, I'll make you a promise, I'll pay back. Now that's a very, very, very inefficient way of raising money. I've done it, it's a lot of work. You do have a lot of coffees, a lot of lunches, and a lot of counting. It's not really super efficient. So that would be one application where you have a regulatory body, everybody knows how it works, the majority of private capital starts that way. And now you have this new technology, and we've got to figure out how to connect these two. You know, they by definition are very different. One is paper, one's digital, one's very slow, one's very fast, one's very limited, one's very global. And working through these situations. So I think there's huge opportunities, to answer your point, in being at the front of that and figuring out how can we better improve, how can we bring more efficiencies to things like governance, things like private markets, etc. And I think it's just fundamentally important for people that already understand how institutions and systems work to then work with people who understand the technology and understand that it's not a fight, it's not a battle, it's what's best for everybody.
Yeah, everything Sean said there makes a lot of sense. To just kind of directly answer your question, I think all of those things can and will exist, like clawback rights, various forms of voting. The biggest impediment to that right now is basically the old legacy system itself. There's a lot of rules that have been put in place by the legacy system that maybe should or should not apply to a lot of these things. One of the most interesting things about Bitcoin, about Ethereum, is it's the first time we've had a version of value, a version of money. It's not all money, but just a version of value that is programmable. You know, prior to this point, all value has essentially been analog. You couldn't do anything really interesting with it other than transfer it from one place to another. Now we can actually program rules into these things. You can, at a programmatic level, actually define that this particular token has these certain rights that can do all of this, and it doesn't take a lawyer to enforce it. Right now, if I have stock in a company, for example, and I want to invoke my rights to do something, you know, such as at a board meeting or something like that, I have to actually rely on the legal aspects and the lawyers to enforce that. And there's no guarantee that's always going to be the case. You know, we live in a country of constant litigation about these very things as people disagree over the interpretation of how something was worded. And this thing was a little vaguer than that. When you're dealing with code, you don't have these ambiguities if it's done correctly. The code does exactly what it's supposed to do, and nothing else. And as long as these things are built correctly, it'll actually allow us to build far more than anything that's been built in the legacy system. It'll allow us to give far more rights to the consumer, to the user, to the person that's holding a token. And there's no way for anyone to take that away from them once it's given to them, because the actual programming of the code will enforce it.
We got time for one more question. Okay.
Alright, simple question. I'm just curious what you guys have found to be the most reliable method or service of storing Bitcoin. I know there's a number of people out there doing it.
Yeah, so those of us who are in the industry, you're going to get a pretty unified answer to this usually, which is that you should always hold your own keys, is what we call it. e.g., you should not actually rely on a service at all. And we generally recommend various types of hardware wallets, which are devices that are made specifically for storing your private keys safely and not touching the internet. Generally, that is by far the easiest and safest way to store your crypto value and be confident that you're not exposing yourself in some unnecessary way.
Yeah, I want to add to that. So there is a company called paved, but they've just built one application which is very similar to what Salt is doing, which is multi-signature transactions. And just for a simple analogy of this, it would be that the three of us are all on a wallet because we all have some joint interest in the business, and two of us have to sign for the transaction to go, and you can add another person, so you can say it's 3 of 4, 4 of 6, 1 of 2, 2 of 3, etc. And that is the first layer of support, because now you know somebody could compromise me, hack me, break my fingers, whatever, and try to get my money, but if they weren't present, then it doesn't matter. Then you can back those up. The second layer is exactly what John said, which is hardware. There's a great company called Kiki, which incidentally Shapeshift owns. And there's another one called Ledger, which I highly recommend. It's just a simple physical device where you can store the first or the second password on there, and then you can add another password. So you can add comprehensive layers of security, similar to how if you have a business bank account, they'll give you a 2-factor dongle that you have to put a 2-pass code in, or using Google Authenticator. You can kind of add about 3 or 4 different passwords to something that you know very simply and not really complicate it that much, and make it very, very, very secure and not have to rely on anybody else.
What was the second one? I'm sorry, Kiki.
Ledger. Yeah, Ledger Nano S.
Let's show some love to our panelists. So just remember, this is an ongoing series, monthly. Usually it's the last Wednesday of each month, totally free, so tell your friends. One other thing, you probably already know, but Denver Startup Week is September 25th to the 29th. So North America's largest free celebration of entrepreneurship and innovation. So registration is now open. You can register and build out your schedule for the whole week. Around 300 programs scattered across the downtown Denver. This is going to act as base camp as well. So shift of location for base camp.